During its 20-plus year tenure being on the top cartoons in Nickelodeon history, SpongeBob has lived way too many adventures.
Rain! You better stop that!
But such a long story also has its ups and downs, right? For sure, life in Bikini Bottom has not been as easy as we wanted to, and here in this video, we will take a look at some of the mistakes that we have been able to find, from lost arms to disappearances, and many other phenomena that you will have probably missed. In Season 12 episode Boss for a Day, we are briefly presented an odd scenario. What would happen if we saw two Mr. Krabs instead of one? While one bossy crab is more than enough, this episode doubled the trouble with a brief dose of the crabby businessman weirdly cloned. After being crushed by a piano, SpongeBob's boss is sent to the hospital. When Mr. Krabs returns to the Krusty Krab, now bandaged and temporarily in a wheelchair, he finds our squared and yellow hero waiting for him. But if you look behind our protagonist, you can see another injured crustacean behind him facing towards the cash register. Surely it's a lightning-fast moment that you'll need to pause the screen to be able to catch. Is the greed of Krabs so big that he cloned himself to gain even more money and conquer the field of fast food in Bikini Bottom? What do you think about it? Number 2. New work, old hat? It is hard to imagine a SpongeBob working outside the Krusty Krab, right? Remember Season 9 of the show? During this season, in the episode SpongeBob You're Fired, Mr. Krabs gives SpongeBob one of the worst news that Bob could ever receive as, in a way to save some money, Krabs decides to fire Bob from the Krusty Krab, leaving him unemployed.
But how about if I work for free?
Yeah, I looked into that. Apparently, it's illegal.
Searching for new places where he could use his abilities and cooking talents, he ends up working for Weenie Hut, a really harsh place to work in. Maybe in a nostalgic error or as a way to remind of the good old times working for Mr. Krabs, the animators suddenly changed the hat that SpongeBob is wearing to his old Krusty Krab hat that he was wearing as part of his uniform. Changing workplaces is always a harsh process to endure, or maybe we can say that in one way or another, SpongeBob's destiny is always tied to his lifelong job under the greediest crab that Bikini Bottom has ever seen. Number 3. Squidward loses his neck? Squidward might be one of SpongeBob's best friends alongside Patrick, but that does not prevent him from facing the biggest dangers in the series, right? During the episode The Lost Mattress from the 4th season of the show, our heroic trio have a very big and important mission. They need to retrieve Mr. Krabs' lost mattress. This won't be an easy feat as, like in every single SpongeBob adventure, things tend to go south really quickly. After investigating and discovering that the mattress is in a dump, they go to the location to get Mr. Krabs' appreciated item, just to meet with a powerful and terrifying guardian worm that stops them in their tracks. This worm doesn't seem to like Squidward that much, and after a brief sequence, the guardian animal attacks him. So, what happens here? After the first attack, we see Squidward covered in bandages, preparing to be attacked once again by the worm. But this time, the animators picked an even worse fate for Squidward. For just a couple of seconds after this, we can see a frame in which Squidward lost his entire neck. Maybe the fight was too rough for SpongeBob's friend, or maybe the worm was just too powerful. But let's be real, poor Squidward always gets the short end of the stick. Number 4, a disappearing house. Continuing with Squidward, have you ever feared that your house is going to disappear? In the episode Missing Identity, SpongeBob is having a hard time because he lost his name tag, but this might not be the only missing thing in that episode. There is one scene in which both SpongeBob and Patrick are talking while walking across Conch Street. We see Bob's house, Patrick's rock, but Isn't something missing? Exactly, we're missing Squidward's home. This is a really big error on the animator's part, as we have one of the most iconic places from Bikini Bottom stolen in front of our faces. SpongeBob may have lost its identity during this episode, but it seems like for a brief moment Squidward lost even more than that.
Why must every 11 minutes of my life be filled with misery?
Number 5. Wrong enter, wrong exit. Until now, we've been giving you small glimpses of little bloopers that have appeared during the series' history. But here comes a big one. During Pressure, an episode from the second season of the show, both SpongeBob and Sandy discuss a very curious topic: the differences between sea and land creatures. This includes many competitions, much like enduring time in dry land, breathing underwater, and yes, be prepared for this, racing. It's during this race between Sandy and Bob where we find a very strange moment led by a big animation error. When Sandy enters the Krusty Krab during the race, she seems to enter the restaurant from the front door. But suddenly, there's no door, and she seems to have entered it from one of the sides of the restaurant. Maybe Sandy just runs too fast, or maybe it's a thing that only creatures from the outside can do. Strange, but funny anyway. Number 6, SpongeBob loses his teeth? Patrick might be SpongeBob's best friend, but that does not stop him from being jealous of the squared protagonist. Big Pink Loser presents an argument between both friends and main characters of the show, as Patrick, much like Bob, wants a trophy for himself, growing tired of Bob getting all the awards for himself. After even becoming partners in the Krusty Krab, there's one scene where we can find a very strange feature in SpongeBob's face. Usually our hero is presented with 2 big teeth in his face, but when he opens the package that ends up becoming the trophy for Patrick, he only has 1 tooth. This might be a strange detail, but it is something that we could not forget to tell all of you. But that wasn't everything, and like we promised in that video, here are another batch of funny and curious Easter eggs that you can find in the amazing long-running series of SpongeBob and His Adventures. Number 1, an infinity power glove?
Join Bikini Bottom's noblest, boldest, oldest superheroes as they bravely prepare for vacation. But wait! While our heroes relax at Leisure Village, who will watch them?
Even in SpongeBob's universe, we're able to find some superheroes, similar to the ones that appear in Marvel or DC Comics. Probably the most famous duo in the landscape of Bikini Bottom is the one formed by Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy, which are a little representation of that universe's Batman and Robin. Even though Mermaid Man's design might be similar to the old look of the Prince of Atlantis in DC Comics, if you take a closer look. But what would be a great superhero tandem without their own nemesis, their supervillain, the one who disturbs peace in Bob's universe? Here we introduce Man Ray. Appearing in the second season of the show, Man Ray will be the arch enemy of the duo during the whole series run.
Excuse me, sir, but I do believe you've dropped your wallet. Doesn't look familiar to me. What? I just saw you.
But what makes him special? Apart from being a parody of DC's villain and Aquaman's foe Black Manta, see the reference here? We see that, like the proper mind master of evil he is, he has a lot of tools at his disposal, one being his weapon called the Power Glove.
Oh, the magic claw from episode 1582. Oh, Man Ray's power glove.
The Power Glove is one of the most recurring gags when referring to both the duo and his rival. This is curious because Man Ray can combine this glove with many accessories, much like Marvel's Thanos combines the Infinity Gauntlet with the Infinity Gems. Thanos was almost able to rule the world with this weapon, but would this be enough to rule over our friends from underwater? Number 2, a Nickelodeon reference. During the whole history of the show, Plankton has been one of the most important rivals of Mr. Krabs in his quest to steal the secret formula of the Krabby Patty. We have many examples of the failed schemes that this little green evil mastermind has plotted over the years, which include brainwashing SpongeBob, stealing King Neptune's crown, becoming a magician, or even designing the Shelly Superhighway to run over the whole building and get the formula. One of the most recurring gags of the series is seeing Plankton getting stomped on during his schemes.
Hi. Well, I guess I've got some explaining to do, huh? No, not the face!
Maybe his brain and his intelligence is superior, but his small stature makes him a little hard to see for the inhabitants of Bikini Bottom. In this episode, after SpongeBob tells Plankton that Mr. Krabs wants to give him the secret formula, he gets stomped on by a man with a boot that gives Plankton a strange but yet familiar shape. Did you get it? This shape is a reference to the old logo of Nickelodeon, which surely will be a happy memory to unlock by those who are watching the cartoon and were born during the 90s. Number 3, SpongeBob's living room. But everything we say about Plankton is not going to be bad, right? During the Season 10 episode Plankton Gets the Boot, we see our aforementioned villain being kicked out of the chum bucket by Karen.
Karen, baby! Come on, Sugar Lips. You know I'm sorry for everything I said.
I accept your apology.
I wasn't talking to you, idiot!
And SpongeBob agrees to let him stay at his house for a period of time. While spending time together, we are transported to our protagonist's living room, which we can say it's a big homage to the whole history of the show. We see that our squared friend has a toy of Mermaid Man, a pizza that reminds us of the episode Pizza Delivery from Season 1, one strange board game based on our favorite phantom, the Flying Dutchman, and even the balloons inside the house spell the word fun, which was the name of an episode that aired during Season 1 of the show. Maybe SpongeBob's house could be considered as Bikini Bottom's own glorified museum. Number 4, a space odyssey? Oh wait, how could we forget about the good old Texas squirrel that lives underwater?
Learn some manners! You're about as ugly as homemade soup.
Hooray, land squirrel!
Sandy is probably one of the most energetic characters around SpongeBob's companions, constantly thinking and planning new plots to surprise every watcher of the show. In this adventure from the first season, Sandy has decided to build a rocket to travel to the moon, but this plan is met with Bob's insatiable curiosity. After they enter Sandy's house and discover the rocket, Bob and Patrick start playing with the features of the vehicle, including many things like changing the gravity to 0, and guess what? Surprises appear here. When everything starts to float, we can see a very strange book in the environment with the number 2001 written on it. 2001? Space? Does it ring a bell for you? 2001: A Space Odyssey is probably one of the best creations for both cinema and pop culture, which really goes in hand to what Sandy's character wants to achieve. Are you surprised by this small reference? Number 5, Squidward's Hall of Fame. How would it be a great SpongeBob video without mentioning Squidward? Squidward Tentacles has been a detrimental part of the show despite not being the main character of the show, but he's had as many feats and professions as our yellow-colored hero. In Season 1 episode Chatterbox Gary, SpongeBob's pet snail Gary gets a device that lets him talk like a normal cartoony being and being able to communicate with the other habitants of the show. Excited about this, SpongeBob brings Gary to Squidward's house to show this new translator. Even though this Gary-Squidward relationship won't end up on the best terms, we see a promising start when the snail is awarded with a tour of Tentacles' house, especially his atelier. In what we can call a Hall of Fame inside Squidward's home, we find many references to other episodes of the show. We can find a picture of handsome Squidward from episode The Two Faces of Squidward, a photo defeating the sea bear from the camping episode, and after that we're able to see the uniform from Band Geeks, making this a really enjoyable trip through the show's history. Number 6, an ode to horror films. Graveyard Shift might be one of the most iconic episodes ever made of this show, as it has many references to this cinematic genre. To make a brief resume of the scenario, Graveyard Shift puts SpongeBob and Squidward working in the Krusty Krab for a whole night, but don't expect this night to be a calm and quiet one. During this episode, our protagonists get stalked to what at first seems to be an assassin that has a spatula instead of a hand. His name is the Hash-Slinging Slasher. This creepy and sinister stalker is a reference to the terror story of The Hook, where a man that has a hook instead of a hand terrorizes young couples in parking lots. But this is not the only thing that's going to shake our nerves today. While our protagonists are cleaning the restaurant in the fright of the night, suddenly the phone rings and nobody answers Squidward's words.
Hello?
Nice try, Squidward.
Nice try what?
The phone will ring, and there'll be no one there. Oh, you crack me up.
SpongeBob, I'm not doing this.
This makes Bob to make a comparison to horror films where the phone rings and nobody answers, much like in the movie Scream. Does it sound familiar? To finish this round of gloomy moments, during this succession of paranormal activity, we see a moment in which Squidward screams that there's green slime oozing down the walls of the building. This is not the first time we see this in the media, right? In 1979's film, The Amityville Horror, we also find a scene in which blood comes down the walls of the haunted house. A little similar to be a coincidence. Do not think we're leaving you like this. Before we leave, we give you one more Easter egg. During the episode Squirrel Record, where Sandy is trying to break many of this universe's world records, we find that there is also a book similar to the Guinness Book of World Records in this series, called The Guinness O'Ripley Enormous Book of Curiosities, Oddities, and World Records. This might not sound like a big one, but it's a really fun reference. Here are a couple more for you to see. Number 1, a Squiddish Santa? Christmas is a special date for everyone, including the inhabitants of Bikini Bottom and, of course, for SpongeBob and his friends. In this Christmas special, SpongeBob gets to know the tradition of Christmas after Sandy explains what this awesome tradition is about. The yellow phenomenon gets so excited, but things don't go as he wants. In an unfortunate turn of events, Santa doesn't show up to Bikini Bottom, and everyone in the city blames SpongeBob, believing that Bob lied about Santa Claus's existence. Due to this, SpongeBob is saddened and disappointed as he only wanted to bring joy and happiness to others. Despite this, he still believes in the celebration and makes a homemade present for his friend Squidward.
I still want you to have this.
What?
This finally encourages Squidward enough to feel the spirit of Christmas. In order to make SpongeBob happy, he pretends to be Santa. But when SpongeBob starts asking questions about his aspects and how different he is in comparison to what he believes Santa to be,
Where's your reindeer and your flying machine?
I loaned them to the Easter Bunny.
And what about that nose?
suddenly, when the camera pans to Squidward, he has only 2 legs instead of the traditional 4 that he has in other scenes. Maybe the animators wanted Squidward to embrace his role as Santa to the fullest, but it is rather unique to see a squid with only 2 legs. Number 2, Patrick does a switcheroo in class? Band Geeks is probably one of the most famous episodes in the whole series. The musical covers, the whole charisma of the band, the uniforms. But not everything that shines is going to be gold, right? When Squidward arrives at band class, his students are seated in rows, with SpongeBob and Patrick naturally sitting together like the absolute besties they are. But when Patrick later has the greatest idea to ask if mayonnaise is an instrument,
Is mayonnaise an instrument?
we see a strange little thing. Remember that he was next to Bob? Now he's suddenly sitting next to Sandy, to the surprise of us all. Since Professor Squidward didn't ask his students to change seats, Patrick shouldn't have been shown sitting next to SpongeBob in the first place. But being the free and rebellious spirit that he is, maybe animators decided that it was better for him to switch places. Number 3. Too much work hurts the eyes? We all know that SpongeBob is very dedicated to his job, right? During this adventure in the first season of the show, SpongeBob ends up sleeping with the refrigerator opened. His house freezes completely overnight. But being the best employee he is, SpongeBob couldn't admit that he was sick with the suds, so he went to work. Of course, he was in no condition to work as he kept sneezing out bubbles and wasn't getting Krabby Patties out at the rate Mr. Krabs wanted him to, which really annoyed the bossy crab. SpongeBob even fell on his knees as he held out a patty, but the burger was sent flying after he gave another sneeze. During this sneeze, maybe the effort was just too big, but suddenly his right eye turned black for a split second. This was unlikely an intentional choice since his eyes are usually white, but it comes to show how committed Bob is with his work and his values, even if this can cause him to put his health and life on the line to make the best hamburgers that Bikini Bottom has ever seen. Number 4, a quick change of tie. Plankton has made many schemes to get the secret formula for the Krusty Krab's signature hamburgers, but let's recap one of the first schemes that Bikini Bottom's resident villain plotted. During the first season of the show, Plankton got to infiltrate Bob's brain and install a mind-controlling device that let him control every muscle in our protagonist's body. While controlling Bob's body, he forced SpongeBob to get out of bed as he planned to make him grab a Krabby Patty and deliver it to the chum bucket and then analyze it to know the secret behind it. When SpongeBob walked toward his pants, his clothes looked perfectly normal, wearing his trademark outfit with his red tie and his shorts. Suddenly, when he walked into them stretching the fabric, his usually red tie turned black for a brief moment. After the fabric snapped back, the tie returned to its original red state. Maybe Plankton's influence over him was too big that he was able to also change his clothes. You'll never know what the next step of this mastermind of evil would be. Number 5, crabs can levitate? Both Squidward and Krabs have become the source of many fantastic memes over the history of the series. Dying for Pie has one of the funniest stories that we can find during the second season of the show. In this adventure, Squidward has a mission during Employee Brotherhood Day, a day on which all employees must exchange gifts that they made themselves. For his gift to Squidward, SpongeBob presents him with a sweater made out of his own eyelashes. But Squidward, being the angry squid he is, doesn't like the protagonist's heartfelt gift, and thus SpongeBob begins to cry copiously, eventually handing Squidward a sweater made from his own tears. During this sad turn of events, there is a brief second where a flaw can be found. While Mr. Krabs and Squidward are pointing at Bob, the crab does not have any legs and his body is hovering in midair. Such a weird error if you are able to see it. But that's not everything. There's another error here as well. Squidward is missing legs too. In the show, Squidward Tentacles has 4 tentacles for legs, but in the same shot as Mr. Krabs, Squidward is seen only having 2. Remember the Santa Claus episode? This might ring a bell for you. Number 6. A ghostly gorilla? I bet that everyone that has seen a single SpongeBob episode recognizes the big gorilla that appears from time to time to attack our heroes. But let's talk about this episode of the 3rd season of the show. In one of the show's funniest yet random gags, a real gorilla comes and begins to pummel Sandy and Patrick. With the amount of craziness and King Kong-ish inspiration, it is understandable if we as viewers did not notice an error in the animation of the gorilla combined with the green screen effects. During the whole time that the gorilla is hitting them, it is partially transparent if you look close enough. If you pay close attention, you can find shots where we as spectators can see right through the gorilla and see Conch Street and the sandy fields of Bikini Bottom. Strange phenomena even seem to occur underwater. Here is another wave of animation errors that we can find in this history-making show. Number 1. SpongeBob Haunted House? There have been many times where we've told you about the many professions and working ideas that SpongeBob has had over the years, right? During the episode Bubble Stand from the 1st season of the show, SpongeBob decides to create his own stand to let his friends and other inhabitants of Bikini Bottom to create and blow their own bubbles. How funny this looks. While both Patrick and Bob are having a really good time, Squidward comes to the stand, and you know that when he's around, strange things always tend to happen. We all know that Patrick's rock, SpongeBob's pineapple, and Squidward's house are a vital part of the structure of Conch Street, so let's take a big look around this time. Being the good friend he is, SpongeBob spins while trying to show Squidward the bubble-blowing technique. His house is missing one of its windows, and not only that, when they're chanting Squidward's name a little bit after, SpongeBob's house is nowhere to be seen. Maybe Bikini Bottom has way more mysticism than we thought at first. Number 2, a dangerous man with dangerous protection? There have been many times when we've been presented with many of the other inhabitants, but have you ever heard about the Strangler? In this episode from the 3rd season of the show, SpongeBob makes a heroic appearance and manages to send one of Bikini Bottom's most feared criminals, the Strangler, to jail. But things won't go as good as our hero wanted for him because which villain does not want revenge on the guy who sends him to jail? In what seems like a cat-and-mouse game between Bob, Patrick, and the Strangler, we can see some animation errors that makes this attempt to kill Bob quite funny. When the police get their hand into the vastly aggressive and dangerous criminal, we see that they even put cuffs on his eyes. Imagine how powerful he is just to get his eyes cuffed too. Seems scary to even hear. But if we continue with the scene, there's a strange detail in the next frames. Suddenly, the eye cuffs have disappeared. Maybe the police changed their minds, or maybe the animators got a second thought about that and left his eyes free. Whatever it is, maybe we need even more protection for such a great villain. Number 3. A trip to the moon? Maybe if you're following this channel, the episode Sandy's Rocket might ring a bell for you from our Easter egg videos, as it is an episode capped with references and great details to look out for. In case you missed it, during this episode, both SpongeBob and Patrick infiltrate Sandy's house and elaborate a plan to steal the squirrel's rocket and try to go to the moon on a friendly and funny trip. Nothing can be wrong here, right? In one of the funniest and wackiest moments in the series, when the rocket that our heroes are piloting starts to lose control and makes circles around the moon, he looks not as bigger, but even way bigger than the moon. This, of course, is to exaggerate the situation, but there are other times when we see that the moon is bigger than the rocket. So what do we think here? Maybe the animators want to trick us? Or it's just a funny detail added to the episode? Number 4, a strange, soon-to-be ghost. Switching to a more Halloweenish theme here, do you know who the resident ghost of Bikini Bottom is? Maybe the name of the Flying Dutchman means something to you. Squidward the Unfriendly Ghost is one of the funniest episodes from the first season of the show, since we can see how Squidward pretends to be a ghost after SpongeBob and Patrick believe he's dead. But not only Squidward is the main protagonist of this episode, because when our heroes are cleaning his house, they end up finding a very strange book. The book containing the story of a character that would be a recurring visitor to Bob and his friends, the ghost known as the Flying Dutchman. But the funny thing is that the cover of the book shows him being green, which is associated with being dead and already transformed into a ghost, when, if it's his origin story, he shouldn't be. Maybe the animators were foreseeing the future, or maybe they forgot about him being alive at that time. What will be the answer? We will never know. Number 5, a not-so-spooky costume? During their mischievous actions and pranks, when they first go to the Palace of Pranks to buy some scary items, we find the first errors. If you look closely enough, when Frank shows Bob the box of exploding chewing gum, the box has a typo, and instead of naming it Exploding Chewing Gum, it says Explopting Chewing Gum. Just a little error to get started. Continuing with the items and their flaws, when we see the spray that the pair will use as the masterpiece to their plan the first time, it has a danger sign at the bottom. But there are some frames when Bob uses it that the sign disappears. Strange, right? And saving the best for last, when the spray washes off Patrick, suddenly his belly button starts to appear and disappear. Maybe this spray has some side effects when used on starfishes. These are just some of the many animation errors that can be found in SpongeBob SquarePants. While they don't ruin the show, they do make it more fun to spot them and wonder how they happened. Maybe they're intentional jokes, or maybe they're just oversights by the animators. Either way, they add another layer of humor and charm to this iconic cartoon. Fans with expert eyes and great vision may have noticed these, but here are 10 more hidden Easter eggs in SpongeBob that you probably never noticed. So let's start with a list to show you some awesome mysterious details that you may have missed. Number 1, a special dance. There have been many times during the history of the show where SpongeBob has done many activities related to some musical discipline. We know the famous episode Band Geeks, where Bob and his friends start what would later become one of the most famous musical groups in Bikini Bottom's history. But this time he left his instrument-playing duties aside and started to flirt with a new discipline, dancing. Of course, the episode we're talking about is Slimy Dancing, aired during the 5th season of the show. Squidward, Patrick, and SpongeBob decide to participate in a dance contest. While SpongeBob and Patrick ended up making it to the finals of the Bikini Bottom Dance-a-thon competition, Squidward's confidence for the win is crushed when he fails to proceed to the finals and is subsequently banned for life from the contest and booted out of the building when he tries to steal the trophy. But let's start with the Easter eggs that we can find in the episode. If you take a look at the episode's name, we have the first one right in front of our eyes. The episode is called Slimy Dancing. Dancing, movies, what could it be? This is a reference to the famous movie Dirty Dancing. What a way to start! Moving to the next one, there is a moment where we can find a reference to a moment that later on will become a mainstay of the series. As when Squidward hurts himself due to having cramps, a dolphin's cry can be heard in the background. This would be something that animators will apply every time that a character was swearing during the episodes to hide curse words. Interesting, right? Also, when everyone is cheering because Patrick won the competition, a cephalopod from the episode Cephalopod Lodge can be seen. Number 2, a ghostly fool? Have you ever been afraid of ghosts? In this episode, SpongeBob and Patrick find a houseboat haunted by ghost pirates. while SpongeBob and Patrick are lying on the ground watching the clouds until they see a haunted houseboat crashing to the ground near them. Patrick wants to check it out, but SpongeBob says that it looks dangerous. Patrick soon convinces SpongeBob to come with him, so the friends go check it out. In this trip, both friends will meet characters like famous ghost Lord Poltergeist and even have interactions with the well-known Flying Dutchman. But let's get to the Easter eggs, because this episode is plagued with cool ones. First of all, when Patrick calls Lord Poltergeist a singing robotic puppet from those pizza joints with the singing animated robots, he's referring to the animatronics from famous restaurants known as Chuck E. Cheese. And staying with food references, the cereal Frosted Brains is a parody of Kellogg's Frosted Flakes. The milkshake gremlin bears a strong resemblance in appearance to the gremlins from the horror movie of the same name. Then we can see a symbol all over the purple wallpaper in the haunted houseboat is a fleur-de-lis, a noble decorative design symbol that literally translates to flower and lily in French. Look at how many references we had in this episode. It looks like a pop culture fiesta. Number 3, breaking the fourth wall. Have you ever heard about the phenomenon known as breaking the fourth wall? Usually this expression is a term used to explain when the characters in a show acknowledge in some way or another that they are indeed part of a show, and thus they talk directly to the audience. In the episode Shuffleboarding, Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy are watching TV in Shady Shoals Rest Home when SpongeBob and Patrick suddenly appear and wake them up. Mermaid Man attacks SpongeBob with the Murmurang, thinking he is a supervillain. In the resulting incident, Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy are injured and sent to the hospital, thus making our protagonist pretend that they are their favorite superheroes. It's here when, in an effort to introduce themselves to the audience, Mermaid Man and Barnacle break the fourth wall.
And defender of Bikini Bottom.
Sammy retired.
And his faithful ward, Barnacle Boy.
Who?
Hello.
Look how funny this is. Also, we see a cameo from a woman from the episode Have You Seen This Snail?, where she is being arrested. It's funny how animators tend to link their episodes and create a massive SpongeBob verse. Number 4, a deadly milkshake. Let's jump to this Season 9 episode because it is a really tricky one. During this adventure, SpongeBob returns to the Milkshake Academy after discovering his milkshake license has expired. The name of the episode itself is a big Easter egg because it's called License to Milkshake. I'm sure that many of you who are cinema lovers recognize this name from the famous James Bond film License to Kill. But this is not the only cinematic reference in this episode, as when SpongeBob is training, the montage is a parody of the movie Top Gun, with SpongeBob riding a motorcycle, flying in a fighter jet, and playing beach volleyball. This looks like a love letter to action movie enthusiasts. Number 5, SpongeBob, a karate master? We talked about military and action films during the last Easter egg, but what about an ode to martial arts films? This time, SpongeBob, alongside his friend Sandy, embarks on an adventure to Karate Island to become the Karate King. As we told you before, this episode contains many references to the films Game of Death, Enter the Dragon, and Kill Bill. For example, Sandy's yellow jumpsuit is a reference to the jumpsuit that both Bruce Lee and Uma Thurman wore in their respective films. Also, the concept of fighting an opponent on each floor is also present in both of these films. SpongeBob and Sandy being invited to an island is also a similar plot to the one in Enter the Dragon. Maybe the animators liked this kind of film, don't you think? Anime also plays a big part here, as we can find some references. When Sandy is getting out of the cage, she uses a series of hand signals which refer to the popular anime manga Naruto. Sandy's and Udon's muscle growth is loosely based on Toguro's 100% muscle growth in the manga and anime series Yu Yu Hakusho. Number 6. Famous in real life? Famous in cartoon life? SpongeBob might be famous in our real world, but what about being famous in Bikini Bottom? This time, SpongeBob believes he has become famous off the Krusty Krab commercial. How ironic. Let's see which Easter eggs this episode has to offer. The Bran Flakes cereal seen in this episode is a real cereal by Kellogg's. And for our movie-related one for this episode, the leg lamp from the 1983 Christmas movie A Christmas Story appears as one of the props from the set. But this is not the only Easter egg we can find, because much like SpongeBob is believing himself to be famous, we even find references to real-life talk shows, much like Flounder Man, which is a parody of talk show host David Letterman. Number 7, want a scuba? During this video, we showed you many references to other media, like films, anime, other cartoons, and many other things. But how everyday things will translate into Bikini Bottom? In Season 11, we find references to things that we can easily be using in our everyday routine. But let's take a brief look at the episode Man Ray Returns first. At the start of the episode, SpongeBob and Patrick beg Squidward to remain in Bikini Bottom, thinking he's moving away. Squidward tells them he's taking a vacation and tells SpongeBob and Patrick not to bother the guest who is renting his house while on vacation. Then a person steps out of the cab, only for it to be Man Ray. The TV narrator introduces him, and Man Ray tells him he is on vacation. As Man Ray goes inside, SpongeBob and Patrick try to run up to him, but they don't get to him in time. The references in this episode might not be as impressive as others, but we see two things clearly showed here. The vehicle known as Scuba is an allusion to Uber, a company that helps people travel from point to point. But in this case, they don't use cars, they use scuba divers. And Squidward renting out his house to Man Ray is a clear reference to the phenomenon Airbnb, a method used by many people to rent houses while they go on vacation. Seems like people in Bikini Bottom are in touch with the latest social trends too. Number 8, A League of Evil. Remember Plankton? His plans to steal the secret formula have had many shapes and forms, and many of them have ended up giving us a big batch of Easter eggs that we know and love. So let's take a look at one of the latest schemes he's had, the one in the 13th episode of the show, in the episode Captain Pipsqueak. We know the tendency of the animators to include many comic book references, as we told in one of our previous videos, especially when Mermaid Man, Barnacle Boy, and Man Ray are around. In this episode, Plankton goes full-on villain and makes a big reference to villains from Marvel Comics. During the scene where Plankton tries on different costumes, one of the outfits he wears references the Marvel comic books villain Venom, but this is not the most important one, as Plankton's Captain Pipsqueak outfit resembles Marvel Comics character Magneto, so much that they look mostly the same. Seems like Plankton chose some big bad bosses to inspire himself. Number 9, Three Little Pigs Underwater? Who believes in fairy tales? In this season 13 episode, Karen tells the fairy tale of a nerd trying to steal an action figure from his three little neighbors. What makes this episode a whole Easter egg itself? That the whole story is based around the tale of the Three Little Pigs. I hope that everybody knows this tale, as when you see the clothes that SpongeBob, Patrick, and Squidward wear, you recognize that they're the same clothes that the three pigs wear in the 1933 Walt Disney Pictures short film, The Three Little Pigs. Also, we see that the big bad wolf is heavily referenced in this episode. Number 10, The Great Sponge-Dini. And for the last one, who would have thought that SpongeBob could ever be a magician? During this episode, SpongeBob lets all his ability and magic loose to learn a new magic trick, but sadly, he doesn't have a brief chance to show it to anyone. But which funny references can we find in this episode? We found a couple of interesting ones. While training and learning new tricks, SpongeBob calls himself the Great Sponge Dini, which is a reference to famous magician Harry Houdini. And also, we see some cards that, with the power of magic, of course, start dancing and moving with Bob. For those who don't know, this is a reference to the story of Alice in Wonderland, where we can find cards with similar powers and magic traits. So funny to see SpongeBob in his full performance. So there you have it, 10 more SpongeBob Easter eggs that you have to see. If you like the content, please subscribe to our channel to watch even more Easter eggs and more SpongeBob-related content. And until the next time, goodbye. Bye.